Thanks for joining us on this latest webisode of All Politics Are Local. I'm WSAV digital reporter John Dowding. Every week we break down news coming from Washington, D.C. to understand how it affects us right here in the coastal empire and Lowcountry. Let's get started. Former Vice President Joe Biden came out on top in the South Carolina Democratic primary this weekend. He was counting on this victory to launch his campaign into the forefront ahead of Super Tuesday. Up until now, Senator Bernie Sanders held a firm lead in the delegate count. Since 1992, nearly every candidate who won the South Carolina primary has secured the Democratic nomination. Biden spoke about what the Palmetto State win meant to him and his campaign over the weekend on CNN's State of the Union.
Well, I think we got a long way to go. Look, this was a big boost for us. I think we're going to do well in a number of states, but Super Tuesday we're only 3 days away, and we're in a situation where we're just beginning to raise the kind of money we thought we'd be able to raise in the front end. We've raised about $18 million this month, $5 million just since the victory or during the victory in South Carolina. So we're feeling good, but it's a long way to go.
He's feeling good going into Super Tuesday, and joining us live from Washington, D.C. to discuss this weekend's race in the Palmetto State is WSAV Washington Bureau Correspondent Kellie Meyer. Thanks so much for joining us, Kellie, on a Monday morning.
Thank you for having me, John, as always.
Of course, of course. It was a long weekend for all of us. I saw you were out, too, talking to us about the South Carolina primaries. I was out in South Carolina talking to voters, and Joe Biden came out on top easily in the state. So let's talk about, why does his win in the Palmetto State matter so much in this race?
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of, as you said, we've been talking about this and looking forward to South Carolina and seeing how this may change or shift the race. We saw, obviously, Buttigieg in Iowa and Sanders in New Hampshire and Nevada and that momentum that Sanders has. But with South Carolina coming into play and Biden really winning big here, it seems like he kind of had that comeback kid moment on Saturday night. And just with the turnaround, the tight turnaround that you see for Super Tuesday and so many delegates up for grabs, it was really that momentum the campaign was hoping for. We saw earlier in the week that Clyburn had endorsed him, and that gave him a bit of a push going into Saturday, and that added jolt to his campaign that he was hoping for, and that support among the black community and the black voters in South Carolina. Now it's looking like some other states in the South may vote similar to how South Carolina did. They lead that effort. Some may copy that in going into Super Tuesday with states like Alabama, North Carolina, Mississippi. But it's such a big day. But the momentum that Biden got on Saturday definitely was a good thing for his campaign and something that he was hoping for this entire time.
Let's talk a little bit about, how many delegates did he walk away with in the contest on in yesterday's and this weekend's primary in South Carolina?
Yeah, I believe it was something like 63, but it brings the totals now. I know that Sanders 58, Biden 50, and then Buttigieg was next, but as we saw, he had suspended his campaign late Sunday night. So really, it's looking at this race between Sanders and Biden, and Tuesday, Super Tuesday, can really show and give a glimpse as who may be clinching that Democratic nomination. It's definitely not the end game, but it's definitely interesting to see, who takes states like Texas and California with a lot of delegates up for grabs. If Biden will have control of the South, as we saw a glimpse from South Carolina, did that give a gauge on how the South might be voting on Saturday? It's such an interesting day. There's so much happening on Super Tuesday. Definitely going to be exciting to see who wins there and who wins big in what areas.
So obviously, again, then just summarizing really all of this, then
yeah,
just Biden's win really helps his future in this race, especially as we go into Super Tuesday, which we'll discuss more in a second. But it really, like you said, it gives that momentum because a lot of the attention was on Bernie Sanders for a while. And also, too, I mean, I want to touch on this really quickly before we go into Super Tuesday, is we saw two major players drop out right after the primary in South Carolina yesterday. We saw Tom Steyer drop out and Pete Buttigieg. So there's definitely a lot of change going on. So how does that help the former VP?
Yeah, and that's a great question. You're right. With Steyer dropping out Saturday night immediately after the results came back, and that was a place that Steyer was actually polling really well and kind of came up in third there. And then with Buttigieg last night, I feel like, some people may have been surprised by that, his suspending his campaign there. But I think if they see that they don't see a path forward to the nomination, then they're going to kind of pull back. I mean, the funding, and they're funding their campaigns and everything that goes into it, or they maybe don't want to see if they don't do well on Super Tuesday, maybe it's avoiding some sort of embarrassment there, and they kind of pull back. But it's interesting to me to see them kind of pull away ahead of just 24 hours to go until the big delegates are up for grabs. So it's fascinating there. But now you're going to see some of the delegates for voters, for people like Steyer and Buttigieg, see where they go to from here, and if they go to a more moderate, middle-of-the-road candidate like Biden, or if they go to someone like Sanders. But this may change the support for Biden. It might give him a boost going into Super Tuesday, so we'll have to look out for that as well.
Well, yeah, we're going to have a lot to look forward to for Super Tuesday, and we'll just keep an eye out as we go look at the polls. So let's talk about Super Tuesday. Yeah. Many of the candidates who are still in the race have high hopes of winning a number of delegates tomorrow during the Super Tuesday contest. A number of states will head to the polls across the country, including big states like Texas and California. Candidates have been traveling to many of those states in recent weeks, hoping to win over voters before tomorrow. So let's talk. You talked a lot about this and touched on it, a lot of this, Kelly, going into Super Tuesday, obviously. But let's look at the main things we should keep an eye out for. What is the most important things we should look out for by tomorrow night when all of those primaries are closing and wrapping up and we're starting to see results come in?
Well, there's so much to look at here, right? There's so much going on across the country. But I think those big states, you want to see who wins there, because that's a lot of delegates up for grabs. And I think it's also interesting to look at the South and see if Biden keeps up the momentum there. What's also interesting is this is the first race, or first primary day, really, that Bloomberg, former mayor of New York City, is going to be in. So that'll be interesting to see if his advertising and all of the money he is throwing into this campaign, if it's truly paying off.
Well, what are the most important states we should be keeping a look out for tomorrow as we see some of the voters going to the polls and seeing results come in?
I think those big ones, I think Texas and California, I think those obviously, like we said, have the most delegates up for grabs. So that really gives a big chunk to whoever takes that there. But then if you see Biden take up some of the South and then get the numbers added up there, if it kind of maybe gives some more push to his side, I feel like those are the sections, at least I'm going to be keeping an eye out for, just to see how voters shift and if some maybe go to Bloomberg in some areas. But I think we're going to be looking at those two, Sanders and Biden, as we head out of Super Tuesday tomorrow night.
Definitely have a lot to look forward to tomorrow night. And let's shift gears from all the election talk and let's go talk a little bit about the coronavirus and obviously all the different developments that have been coming up with that. So the White House this weekend, as you saw when you were at the press conference, is signaling a stronger response to the coronavirus outbreak. And President Trump says he'll meet with pharmaceutical leaders today to discuss a working vaccine. Vice President Mike Pence and Secretary of Health and Human Services Alex Azar spoke over the weekend about the administration's latest efforts to fight the virus.
For most people that contract the coronavirus, they will recover. They will deal with a respiratory illness. We'll give them treatment. But for people that have other conditions that would militate toward a worse outcome, that we could have more. We could have more sad news, but the American people should know the risk for the average American remains low.
So again, we just heard Vice President Mike Pence saying the risk remains low right now. Obviously, Kelly, you were there when the president and the vice president were there discussing all the latest developments with the coronavirus. So tell us, what was the biggest takeaway from that press conference on Saturday?
Yeah, so the president tweeted about this press conference probably around noon on Saturday. That was before we heard about the first U.S. death from the coronavirus in the mainland from someone that I don't believe had traveled outside of the country or to these places that were like China or Iran or places like that, or Italy for that matter. But So the news broke just before the conference happened. So then we kind of had a sense of, okay, this is why he is holding this rare Saturday briefing, that he's coming out to specifically address the media and the country and talk about the steps they're taking. Of course, they had announced the coronavirus task force. He appointed Vice President Mike Pence to that earlier this week, around Wednesday and then Thursday, talking about that task force. They had met for 2 hours on Saturday morning, discussing some options they were taking going forward. They said that they were going to add additional travel restrictions from Iran. They also increased the highest level of travel advisory to level 4. The president asked the media and politicians not to report anything that incites panic. So they really, as you mentioned in that soundbite from Vice President Pence, they wanted to really let people know that the risk is low and remains low, but to let them know that this could change rapidly. But it sounded like they came out there to try to, I would say, ease the concerns of Americans, kind of lower some of the worry. And of course, we've been seeing the effect on the stock markets, and the economy is such a big part of the president's campaign. It's such a big part of his administration and his re-election campaign that he really wanted to show and calm people's nerves to make sure that the economy and everything stays in place and the stocks don't continue to decline. But whether or not people's concerns were eased, that remains to be seen. They also have a meeting at the White House happening later today with pharmaceutical companies. It actually was originally set up. It was already in place because they wanted to discuss lowering drug cost prices. But now they may also be discussing the coronavirus and possible vaccines or anything they could do going forward to decrease this concern and fear among the country right now.
Well, we'll definitely just have to keep an eye out on the latest developments. Like you said, they don't want to say or do anything that incites any fear in the public. So we'll just have to keep an eye out on the latest of what this task force is saying, as well as what other officials are saying about it. And hopefully they can develop a vaccine soon. But that's all the time we have for today. So thank you so much, Kellie, for joining us, as always, to help us break down this latest news from Capitol Hill.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you so much, Kellie. And News 3 is your local election headquarters. So make sure to stick with News 3 on air and online for the very latest. You can see more of Kellie's stories on our website at wsav.com/Washington. Thank you so much for watching. I'm John Dowding. We'll see you again next week on All Politics Are Local.